Welcome to Ahead of Her Time, a celebration of 25 years of the Jewish Women's Archive, the living, growing record of Jewish women's experiences, stories, and influence. I'm Judith Rosenbaum, the CEO of JWA. I'm so glad you're with us to mark this milestone and to celebrate the visionary women who shape the past, present, and future of JWA and of our world, a world that is both beautiful and deeply broken. A woman ahead of her time. Who can find her? We've all encountered them, in person or in story. Some are trailblazers, celebrated in their lifetimes, like Nobel Prize-winning scientist Rosalind Yallo or Algerian writer Bert Benishu Abouker. Some are boundary breakers who were renowned and reviled, like anarchist Emma Goldman, once known as the most dangerous woman in America, or the Hasidic spiritual leader, the Maiden of Ludmir. Some are our own mothers, grandmothers, aunts, or daughters. Thanks to JWA, their stories now have a home. Like each of you, every woman in the Jewish Women's Archive is unique and extraordinary. She's also in good and crowded company. As we continue to document and elevate their stories with your support, those who were once ahead of their time will be right on time. The Jewish Women's Archive was founded 25 years ago by and for women ahead of their time. In the early days of the internet, when Google was just a very large number, when TikTok was the sound of a clock, when tweeting was something only birds did, Gail Reamer and the founding board, led by Barbara Dobkin, envisioned a digital archive that would recognize the value of Jewish women's lives and make their stories accessible to everyone. Tonight, we will celebrate their leadership, recalling voices from the past and amplifying the voices of the future. This event honors JWA's founders and our Rising Voices Fellows and Alumni, a growing community of young leaders, because JWA is a bridge between past and future. We offer unique opportunities for multi-generational conversation, learning, and connection, as you'll see in action tonight. Standing here in November 2021, the urgency of history is palpable. We're reckoning with the ongoing impact of slavery and its role in the story of America. We're struggling to come out of a pandemic that has highlighted the challenges women still face in the 21st century workforce and family. And we're witnessing rising anti-Semitism around the world, evoking the specter of a history that we desperately hoped was behind us. With our distinctive appreciation of Jewish identity and gender, JWA is providing new and nuanced perspectives on the dynamics of the past and the challenges of the present. Today, 25 years after JWA's founding, our work matters more than ever. The stories we tell, the conversations we cultivate, the role models we lift up, and the leaders we train have a powerful impact on the world. Each has the potential to move us, change us, and open new possibilities for imagination and action. It is my privilege now to introduce JWA's founders, Gail Reamer and Barbara Dobkin, to start us on our journey.
Who starts?
I do. I chaired a committee for the Jewish Founders Network, and the issue was women. What a surprise. And they wanted me to find a speaker for the conference. So somebody, Susan, suggested Gail, and I'd never heard of Gail Reamer. She was in Boston, I was in New York. You know, there were no trains then.
Provincial New York.
Exactly. And so I called Gail, and Gail did it. Okay, so that's how I met her.
That's not how I remember it.
Okay, how do you remember it?
They told you that I was going to be on the panel, and you weren't very happy because you never heard of me. Now you can continue.
Talk about what you talked about, and then I'll talk about what happened from that.
Smashing Idols was a piece commissioned by the Cummings Foundation, and it was written by Leonard Fine, an important journalist and social commentator of that era. And it was a prescription for Jewish continuity. And how do we keep Jews Jews? And the answer was social action and social justice. And it's a very compelling and beautifully written piece. The only problem with it is that it was written from a total male perspective. Anyway, so I did a close reading of it to point out that we can't talk about just future if we're going to constantly leave out women. And the problems of making this the centerpiece of the conference.
So Gail got everybody really riled up, but I was on board as soon as she started talking about the Jewish Women's Archive, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Right. It was very exciting to meet Barbara because she was someone who was very interested in history, was very interested in historic artifacts, documents. She herself is a collector, and she really got the dream that I had, the vision that I had for an archive.
There was no sense that Jewish women had anything to do with the Jewish community, and it really was upsetting to me because I do care about history, and I do believe that if you don't know where you came from, and you have no idea where you're going.
So the effort was to really create something where Jewish women could see themselves, which they didn't see themselves in most history books, archives, anywhere for that matter, films, etc. These posters influenced young kids who saw them. It wasn't
Absolutely.
just young kids. They meant something to teachers. Teachers had material to teach with that they didn't have before those posters.
And I also saw it as a way to shake up the Jewish community. Guess what? They're important women, and you haven't been paying any attention to them.
They said these women have stories, and their stories are worth knowing, and their stories are going to encourage you to be somebody in your life.
I was living in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, in elementary school, and I would volunteer oftentimes at the small Jewish library that was connected to the Jewish Community Center. And at one point, I was going outside and I noticed these tightly rolled posters that had been discarded. They were actually just in the garbage. And I took off the elastic band and I unrolled them, and there in front of me were these gorgeous JWA posters. And I immediately rolled them back up and I put them in my backpack and I took them home with me, where I proudly put them up on my bedroom wall. And I think there's something quite magical about going to sleep at night surrounded by these women, these angels that penetrate your dreams and that motivate you and inspire you to be somebody that you never thought you could be, to be somebody that could be a person of mission. And the reality is that women need to see people that look like them in order to learn of the possibilities of what they can contribute to society.
Yes, that is absolutely true. Gail and I worked together for a lot of years.
And good years.
Good years, lots of good years. We had a lot of good years.
We said from the beginning that we are creating an archive for the 21st century. Even though it was 1995, we knew that we were creating something for the future. I have to say I'm very proud of what the archive has accomplished over the last 25 years. What I said about this Smashing Idols was that I didn't want any man to say what Leonard Fine said to me when I challenged him as to why he didn't mention a single woman. He said, well, where would I go to find out about women? And I thought, that's what we never want to see again.
I think that what we did is amazing. I really do. And I love that the next generation is coming in, and the very young people working at the archive, and that they have young people who are much more involved than they were before. I think it's growing, and it's growing in so many ways, and we'll keep seeing that.
So much of why I am in this moment and so much of where I have come to in my professional work and my calling has been really because of JWA.
Hello, my name is Gloria Steinem, and I want to congratulate the Jewish Women's Archive on a 25th anniversary. That's fantastic. And I'm happy to participate in the name of my Jewish grandmother, Pauline Steinem, who I sure is here in spirit. Now, for my first trivia question, which Jewish suffragist served as one of the 2 U.S. delegates to the International Council of Women? And here are our choices: Maud Nathan, Gertrude Wheel, Anita Politzer, and Pauline Perlmutter Steinem. What do you think? Well, you won't be surprised to learn that the correct answer is my grandmother, Pauline Perlmutter Steinem, who was also a pioneering educator and who organized women to vote in groups so that when they went to the polls where otherwise they were harassed out of voting by gangs of men and boys, they would have each other's safety. So that's a lesson to us still. Now, here is my second trivia question. What was the slogan of the 1970 women's strike for equality? The possible answers are: don't iron while the strike is hot, our bodies our choice, the personal is political, and girls say yes to boys who say no, which should be explained by boys who say no to going to Vietnam, right? So think about that. What do you think the right answer is? And maybe you won't be surprised to learn it's don't iron while the strike is hot. It's what we had big banners when we were marching down Fifth Avenue. And we should still be marching, right? And we are still marching.
25 years ago, a group of ambitious, forward-thinking Jewish women came together to found the Jewish Women's Archive. These women were, and are, leaders in their own right, in fields ranging from law to philanthropy to rabbinical studies. They paved the way in their professional lives and had the vision, initiative, and chutzpah to found the organization we are celebrating today. JWA's founding board saw a glaring gap in the world, a need to record, archive, and share the stories of Jewish women through space and time. The founding board is an inspiration to all of us. They laid the foundation for the incredible work that has been going on for 25 years. JWA was founded before I was even born, and it's hard to envision a world without it. For me, the Rising Voices Fellowship was the first time I realized my Judaism and my feminism weren't mutually exclusive. RVF empowered me to lean into my voice, to understand that my writing can have impact, and that my voice deserves to be heard. As one of the youngest members of the JWA board now, I am so grateful to the founding board. I am proud to carry on your legacy and to define my own. Your leadership and vision continue to empower young Jewish women, spark multi-generational conversation, and inspire storytelling. To the founders of JWA, I say this: thank you for your vision, for your creativity, and for your dedication. Thank you for bringing this organization to life. L'chaim.
Have you ever walked into a classroom and asked students to name Jews who have made history? Before JWA, you might have heard about Abraham, Albert Einstein, maybe Bob Dylan. Today, thanks to JWA, our students have a much bigger panoply of role models and inspiration. From pioneering Rabbi Regina Jonas to labor activist Rose Schneiderman, from Olympic athlete Bobby Rosenfeld to medieval businesswoman Doña Gracia Nasi. From its earliest days, JWA knew education would be core to our work. We chose to work with teachers so that we could reach thousands of students and change the communal narrative by introducing the next generation to a broader and more inclusive history, one in which students of all genders would see themselves reflected. Because, as we know, if you can see it, you can be it. Over the years, JWA's education work has evolved organically, moving from the Women of Valor posters, which one educator called a stealth curriculum, to curricula and lesson plans, which provide teachers with free and flexible materials to use in a range of settings. From there, we developed the Institutes for Educators that trained teachers across North America to work with primary historical sources and to treat them as Jewish texts that could introduce new voices. In partnership with teachers, JWA has introduced tens of thousands of students to the Jewish women who have shaped our world. We've helped raise a new generation who take for granted that women's history and stories matter. In 2004, our educational materials and programs helped shape the national commemoration of the 350th anniversary of Jewish life in America, drawing on the riches of history, culture, and leaders like Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Thanks to JWA, the celebrations of the 350th included recognition of women and the key roles they have played throughout American Jewish history and life. And thanks to JWA, we know there will be ample documentation of Jewish women's contributions accessible at our fingertips so that future celebrations will never again exclude their stories. We learned over the years that our work with educators not only impacted students and classrooms, but transformed the lives of educators themselves, giving them new tools and new context for their teaching and for their own lives. I'm delighted to introduce you to Master Educator Barbara Rosenblit, who was first inspired by JWA 20 years ago, and in turn has infused her creativity back into JWA's education work, helping us train teachers, and most recently, with the support of the Covenant Foundation, developing a new arts-based oral history curriculum.
JWA and I first met up at a conference in 1999. I didn't know much about the history of Jewish women. I didn't think there was much. I left that weekend with new eyes and new ideas. If JWA were on a dating app, it was a definite swipe right. It was love at first sight. Teaching in a Jewish day school, high school, I boldly offered a course called Jewish Women in Modern America, which included an intergenerational interview piece with women 75 and older. The students learned to interview, to listen with intention, to probe with resolve. I learned that life narratives are powerful teaching tools. And then we added a new interpretive element. I teamed with Sheila Miller, an art educator and art teacher, and she guided the students to translate these freighted interviews into the language of art. We wrapped each year up with a community-wide art opening. Over the years of the course, 180 artworks honoring local women were created. Hundreds attended these events. And now, with a Covenant grant, we and JWA are working together to expand this work. Teachers who are inspired and nurtured with rich resources and support have a reach that is impossible to quantify. Thank you, JWA, for the tools and for the reach.
Among the amazing resources available at the Jewish Women's Archive is the Shalvi Hyman Encyclopedia of Jewish Women. JWA brought the encyclopedia onto its site in 2009, making it freely accessible to anyone with an internet connection. In this format, the encyclopedia brings the stories of Jewish women across history and the world to 1.5 million users each year from all backgrounds, genders, and ages. This past June, JWA launched a new edition of the encyclopedia with hundreds of updated entries and new entries addressing populations and topics that were previously underrepresented, such as women in Sephardi and Mizrahi communities, Jewish women of color, LGBTQ Jews, and women with disabilities. And JWA is continuing to revise and expand the encyclopedia on an ongoing basis to keep it up to date and inclusive. The encyclopedia has had a significant impact on students, scholars, and the general public, including me and my work. When I first found the Yiddish book, Frauen in die Ghettos, about Jewish women who fought in the resistance, I knew I'd stumbled upon a treasure. But when I began to translate the book, I lacked so much contextual understanding. JWA's Encyclopedia of Jewish Women was my first go-to source for information about many of these women and their worlds. Plus, its clear and rigorous citations helped me build a bibliography around the subject. I really do credit the encyclopedia for enabling me to take this project first to book form, now being translated into 19 languages, and hopefully to film as I co-write a screenplay for Steven Spielberg's Amblin Productions. This is just one of the ways that JWA's encyclopedia impacts our broader culture.
Hello everyone, I'm Vinnie Feldstein, and congratulations to the Jewish Women's Archive for 25 incredible years. All right, I am here for some trivia, so let's do it. The first question, which Jewish performer had her first leading role on Broadway in the 2017 revival of Hello Dolly that I was lucky enough to be a part of as well? A, Barbara Streisand, B, Bette Midler, C, Sophie Tucker, or D, Tiffany Haddish? The answer is B, the divine Miss M, Miss Bette Midler, who is one of the most hardworking, remarkable, dedicated, and devilishly funny people you will ever meet. Okay, question number 2. Which of the following was not a character played by Fanny Brice? A, Mrs. Goldberg, B, Baby Snooks, C, Secondhand Rose, or D, Soul Saving Sadie? The correct answer is A, Mrs. Goldberg. That was a character made famous by Gertrude Berg, but Fanny played all the rest, and you can learn more about Fanny Brice in the Jewish Women's Archive documentary film, Making Trouble. I am very honored to be playing Fanny Brice very soon, so I will definitely be watching. Thank you all so much, and have a great night.
I was born in Seattle, Washington on October 14th, 1910.
I was born March 29th, 1909 in New York City.
Oral history is a way of getting as close to the truth as one can get. And I say this because it's an aggregate of stories, storytelling being the centerpiece of an oral history.
My grandmother and I were very, very close. I didn't understand Yiddish very much, and she was only starting to learn English and broken English. But I loved her so much. I can't tell you, she was the light of my life. I adored that woman, and she was so warm and loving to me.
The stories of Jewish women at different times in their lives together creates a story not only of their personal experience, but of the community experience and of the larger Jewish world experience. When the Jewish Women's Archive began, it was interested in collecting and preserving and then presenting history. It soon became involved in the creation and the modeling. One example of the modeling would be the guide, the oral history guide. It is a very complete look at how to do an oral history of your family, of your community, and to do it intelligently and well. And I use mine, and I thank the Jewish Women's Archive all the time when I turn its pages. One of the best examples of this kind of documentation of women's lives was the project, one of the early projects that was done in 1997, where women of Newton, Mass, and surroundings were interviewed and then presented an art exhibit. And it brought alive, which is what oral history can do. After Katrina, the idea was born to go and interview the Jewish community and to learn about the Jewish community and the lives of the Jewish community there in the context of having survived this terrible storm. In two cities, in Baltimore and in Seattle, there was an oral history project called Weaving Women's Words, and again is a collection that is so rich for scholarship in so many ways, as well as a treasure for the families of the women who participated. Technology means that you can carry the possibility of asking for or telling a story in the palm of your hand. And JWA has recognized this possibility early on. So the stories that are all around us will be easier to access and to have and to hold. We will have this treasure trove of stories and histories and the reflections of not just the famous women whose stories we sometimes hear about, but also the women who live next door and who are either the ordinary extraordinaries or the extraordinary ordinary woman. We all know them, perhaps are them, and the enormous accomplishments that so many of them do every day.
This is Isabel Kirsch, and I am here today with my grandmother, Marguerite Letterberg, to interview her as part of the Story Aperture project. Today is March 26th, 2017, and we are at my grandma's apartment in Manhattan, New York. Grammy, do I have your permission to begin recording?
Yes.
All right. I know you remember when I was a Rising Voices Fellow a couple of years ago. It certainly sticks with me, and it's, I think, a project that has continued to linger even after my time in the fellowship was the oral history project that I was able to do with Grammy, with my grandmother. She was a Holocaust survivor, but she was obviously much, much, much more than that. And the opportunity to sit down with her, talk about her life story, talk about her professional life and her family life, and kind of really sit down and actually do so kind of in an official and recorded way that created a record for all of us to have in later years, was incredibly special to me. And especially now that she's no longer alive, I really appreciate that we have that recording, and I really appreciate that we were able to make that happen. I don't know if that lingers with you in quite the same way.
Oh, it absolutely does. My favorite part of the liturgy is L'Ador Vador, from generation to generation. So the fact that you and she were able to do that is really wonderful. It just and it's something I'll certainly always cherish. So I'm really glad you were able to do it.
As am I. And I know we've certainly seen the power of intergenerational conversation in our family. And as you can see, we're incredibly grateful to JWA for making these kind of connections possible. To explore what different generations can continue to learn from one another, we now turn to Professor Joyce Antler, a JWA founder, in conversation with Rising Voices alumna Madeline Canfield.
So, Madeline, I'm surprised that so many of the issues that feminists began to work on in my generation remain today. Issues of sexual harassment, of abuse, of discrimination, they still seem to be present even for people of your generation. It makes me wonder, what have we accomplished in 50 years? And at the same time, there seem to be a whole new realm of issues.
I don't necessarily see any one of these fights as, siloed off into one fight versus one fight or just one fight. We achieve justice for women when we look at our world, we probe what's going on in it, and we say, how do we root out these systems that have historically kept women out of power and out of places where they can emerge into their full selves?
That's very reassuring to me, because in my mind, the central feature of women's liberation was its collective nature, that you didn't act alone, you acted with a group, and you acted on behalf of yourself, but of all women.
One of the ways that I found it extremely meaningful in my life is through something that JWA empowered a group of fellow young women and I to create, which was an organization called Jewish Teens for Empowered Consent. And we were discussing the issues of heteronormativity and misogyny, really these gender politics that dominate toxic hookup culture in the Jewish community, in particularly youth group spaces that we had grown up in and come to cherish, but felt that we were being in many ways objectified by, the rampant nature of this really insane and unregulated culture. But what has proved perhaps one of the most powerful elements of that organization is the Instagram page we created, in which teens of all gender identities, the vast majority tend to be young girls, but we definitely have plenty of boys and non-binary folk who are also commenting and submitting their own stories of objectification, of hookup culture, of, in often very explicitly, instances of homophobia or sexual assault, in which they had these experiences. They didn't know who to talk to because the consciousness phasing space, it wasn't immediately there. And then you put it out there and you give yourself voice and you lend your voice to an ongoing conversation.
I'm very pleased to hear that. I will admit to you, I've never been on Instagram. And as a professor of women's studies, I have been over the years disappointed and shocked, in fact, at the lack of knowledge that students had about Jewish women. I remember in one women's history class, I asked, can you name any important, significant Jewish women who have shaped our history? And there was not a name that people knew.
One of the things I'm really grateful to the JWA for was being a high school student and having the opportunity to learn the history of Bella Abzug in particular, but women like her, both second wave feminists fighting alongside Bella for the ERA, feminist labor or Jewish labor organizers from the early 1900s fighting on the Lower East Side. So getting to learn about them from the JWA and to present it to us so that we could learn, and then we could shape the conversation of what did they do, how did they have the capacity to be such trailblazers, to be such rabble-rousers, to have their voices heard.
As a founding member of the Jewish Women's Archive, I've been delighted to connect with groups of women who are not my age, who are of different generations. We worried, in fact, in the early years about telling our stories and learning new stories from other generations. We didn't know how to connect to them. They weren't part of our everyday lives. And so the JWA does offer a mechanism to find other people, to use technology, to use groups and create a kind of cohesiveness across the generations.
Coming to the JWA, I've had the tremendous capacity to learn from your generation and also to interact in a way that has given young people like me the opportunity to offer our own modern insights for the feminists who came before us. I feel that I've learned from all of you and from you specifically how to tell the stories that we want to tell. And yet the one thing that I think that we still have to offer is how those stories, as young people seeing such an intersectional world, how those stories historically maybe excluded women of color and queer women and disabled women and women of so many more identities, young women, and how we can continue to tell those stories that are radically inclusive and that expand the full gamut of the American female Jewish experience.
I've learned from your generation that we have to listen. We have to hear the new issues, the new perspectives, the courage and the dynamism of your generation is affecting those behind you. And we have to understand how this has happened and what motivates you, rather than simply sticking to the stories we've told and the ways we've told them. So that means being open and being curious and finding ways to connect to people like you.
There is definitely this idea that my generation is very obsessed with cancel culture. But one thing that we learn how, when working with older generations, to do when dealing with history and uncovering the full scope of what people did and what maybe they failed to do is how to be equivocal in celebrating people, that people are complicated, and so it doesn't mean that we immediately cancel them, and it does not mean that we gloss over the history. And I think that from both ends we get the ability to be discerning and the ability to understand. And that gives us a whole look at the women that we are inspired by and the women that we want to become by learning from the glory and the mistakes.
I think as women historians, we had to come to terms with the fact that the heroic narrative of women's lives in the past wasn't all linear, and that there were moments in which we had to face confrontations, prejudices, aspects of women's behavior and activism that we didn't necessarily like. I think that has been part of my generation's coming to terms with women of the past as well. It is a challenge that your generation will go forward with, and I don't think we'll ever uncover all the answers, but I think to know what the direct contributions and some of the more negative aspects have been is quite important, and it's quite a challenge to discover them.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for this conversation and the opportunity to learn from the wealth of research that you have done, the stories that you have told, and to educate me about how we can use the past and use our foremothers as inspiration for the future that we are building together.
Madeline, I feel so much more optimistic, not only about your generation, but about the world. You've taught me new things that I haven't learned in the past, and I leave here feeling absolutely terrific about the roads ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce and Madeline. It is inspiring to witness the multi-generational engagement and learning that JWA makes possible. I speak tonight as a representative of the founding board of JWA, who 25 years ago committed to enlivening Jewish stories with the voices and perspectives of women past and present to ensure vibrant and inclusive communities going forward. I am so proud today to witness the burgeoning leadership of the new generation of young Jewish women through JWA's Rising Voices Fellowship. Reading their thoughtful essays on gender, Jewishness, history, and culture helps me understand the nuances of 21st century identity. In learning about the ways they are shaping conversations and making change in their communities, it gives me hope for a better future. Please join me in raising a glass to the amazing community of JWA's Rising Voices Fellowship. Though you were not yet born when we founded JWA, we created it for you. We pass the torch of leadership with pride, gratitude, and confidence. L'chaim.
I will never forget how my grandma's face lit up as she told me about her first date with my grandpa. We got all dolled up and went to see Al Jolson perform in Boston, she said. I learned of this memory when I interviewed my maternal grandmother for an assignment for the Intro to Women's Studies course I took in college in the 1980s. I don't remember much else about the interview, but what does stand out vividly for me today, 3 decades after the experience, is my grandmother's initial response to my request for an interview. "Why bother with me?" she said. "Interview Grandpa, honey. He has much more interesting things to say." This from a woman who was born in the Pale of Settlement in 1904 and immigrated to the U.S. as a toddler, whose mother tongue was Yiddish, who came of age during the Roaring '20s and lived through 2 world wars, the founding of the State of Israel, and second-wave feminism. Not to mention that my grandma's mind was sharp as a tack and that she had a voracious appetite for books and the news. I was crestfallen that my grandmother had imbibed the notion that her experiences were less valuable than a man's. The Jewish Women's Archive was founded to counteract that deeply ingrained dismissal of women's experiences and to ensure that Jewish women are counted among the makers of history. JWA's mission to amplify the voices of Jewish women reverberated through 25 years of my own life, such that my own daughter, who is named for my grandma, would never doubt the significance of her place in the Jewish past. I am so proud to serve as the chair of the Jewish Women's Archive as we celebrate our 25th anniversary and pay tribute to our visionary founders and Rising Voices Fellows. Midor Lador, from generation to generation, Jewish women will forever have a living, breathing source to store and share our contributions to history. I invite you to join me in giving generously to JWA in honor of our milestone. I, for one, will be making a special gift this year in memory of my grandma. I think she'd be proud.
Hello, Jewish Women's Archive. This is Tova Feldshuh, and congratulations on your 25th anniversary. Brave ragazze, benissimo, eccellente, fabuloso. What Jewish politician famously said, "Whether women are better than men, I cannot say. But I can say they are certainly no worse." Bella Abzug, Florence Prague-Kahn, Golda Meir, Alma Hernandez. And the correct answer is C, Golda Meir, the first and so far the only female prime minister of Israel. And don't you forget it. She studied at the Sorbonne, fought in the Haganah, and has published more than 40 books. This accomplished Jewish woman is Betty Friedan, Ruth Westheimer, Shulamit Aloni, Simone Weil. And the correct answer is Ruth Westheimer, best known as Dr. Ruth, the groundbreaking, joyful sex therapist, and the person I'm about to play, December 4th, starting at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, in Becoming Dr. Ruth by Mark St. Germain, directed by Scott Schwartz and starring the marvelous, brilliant actress Tova Feldshuh.
You probably think of history as the story of the past. That's part of it, of course, but there's so much more. History tells the story of change over time. So if you're interested in making change in the world, you better believe that history matters. JWA uses history as a lens through which to understand and respond to the pressing issues of our time. From the election of Trump to the Me Too movement, from Black Lives Matter to the pandemic.
I discovered Can We Talk from the Jewish Women's Archive in 2018 in the depths of the Trump administration, in a time of a lot of devastation, desolation, and despair for all sorts of communities, but for me personally as well, as a Jewish trans woman. Hearing this podcast, it kind of helped, it showed me the power of Jewish women to make changes in their own societies and in the wider world, and it showed me the breadth and accomplishments of Jewish women, and it made me feel like I was part of such a strong, diverse Jewish women community.
When COVID started,
JWA began offering these terrific programs, biographies of women, Jewish women in history. And I started watching with my mother. It was a great way to connect with her. I'm in New York, she's in Texas. We watched Henrietta Zold, we watched Bertha Pappenheim, and afterwards I would pick up the phone and call her and say, "Mom, what did you think? Wasn't that fascinating?"
And this was wonderful to be together and to read a book together, listen to a podcast together, and discuss what we've done, what we've seen. And we've always done that with each other anyway. This way we were together. It was wonderful.
During a deeply lonely time, JWA made it possible for me to connect with my mom and be together and learn together and really appreciate our Jewish history together.
This was something special to us, and I appreciate that JWA has done it.
The Jewish Women's Archive was one of the first places that I was able to self-actualize. It has an enormous store of information on Jewish women from India to Morocco, connecting me with my interfaith family in a way I had not been able to before. The stories of influential and daring Sephardi and Mizrahi women are incredibly accessible via this resource. I have so much genuine care for the mosaic of Jewish people that live everywhere in every place that you could think of. JWA brings them together.
Legacy gifts are a powerful way to not only support an organization, but also to pass on values to your family. I fell in love with the work of the Jewish Women's Archives from the moment it was started, and then had the opportunity to watch it grow as an observer and then as a board member. JWA's unique work to uncover, preserve, and tell the stories of overlooked, sometimes ignored Jewish women on whose shoulders we stand. I'm the daughter of an incredibly strong woman who was a Holocaust survivor, whose story I've been able to preserve. I have 3 sons, 6 grandchildren, 3 of whom are girls. Part of my decision in making my legacy gift is not only to support the amazing work of JWA, but to pass on values, especially to my granddaughters, so they know and understand the importance of preserving and building on the stories of strong women on whose shoulders they stand as they make their way into the world. I hope you will join me in supporting the Jewish Women's Archives and in passing on this important legacy and values for the future.
In the context of history, 25 years is not a long time. But these 25 years have been a period of particularly significant change in politics, in media, and in technology. In this time of rapid transformation, so many organizations have come and gone, but JWA has survived and thrived to share not just 25, but thousands of years of Jewish women's stories. As pioneering anthropologist Barbara Meyerhoff once wrote, "Everyone has a story. These stories, told to oneself and others, can transform the world." Thank you for helping JWA share stories that transform the world, and for celebrating with us tonight. I hope we can count on you to help JWA continue to lift up Jewish women's voices, expand our narratives, change our culture, and create the history that is to come. For a glimpse of our future history makers, I'm delighted to introduce Rising Voices alumna and slam poet extraordinaire, Ruby Russell, coming to us from Israel with her powerful performance.
In Judaism, the name is the most sacred of heirlooms. The seed, from family members past, planted in the breath of new generations. New petals on ancient roots blossom each time it is spoken aloud. I am years from having a child, but still I dream of baby names. In no particular order, here is my collection of seeds. For a daughter, I hope, will grow into a matriarch. Ayala, origin. My soft-spoken grandmother, yelling only at Passover songs and at those who didn't arrive to the Seder. Lidi, origin. The grandmother I never met, feared her own Judaism, an embodiment of God nonetheless. Levana, origin, Hebrew, meaning moon, so my daughter will know her waxes and wanes are her power. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, or Leah, the foremothers forgotten beside their husbands. Maybe something just super Yiddish or Ladino. Remind her diaspora is a proud part of our story. Amit, after the old lesbian taxi driver I met in Tel Aviv, because damn, she was fabulous. Amy, like Winehouse, like belt out exactly how you feel. Bat El, literally meaning daughter of God. So she knows she was brought into this world holy and is unconditionally so. Miriam, she who brought water and song. From Miriam, my daughter will learn to nourish the stomach and the soul. Ruth, after the one in the Tanakh and the Supreme Court. Seeds, names, stories, imaginary little girls. Call it playing house or blame it on teenage hormones. I think it's me learning to mother myself. Find my future in the unfinished or untold stories of my ancestors. Each seed sits in my womb. Young womb fertilized by history, sprouting into my bloodstream, setting my pulse. Rhythm for a folk dance, a song, a pen looping on paper. The steps, the letters are these. Ayala, Lidi, Levana, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Amit, Amy, Bat El, Miriam, Ruth. Let's say it again.
Like a merchant ship, strong and wide, golden oranges deep inside. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. With purple silk and tapestry, she weaves a blanket to cover me. More than buys a field, she plants a vine. Come the autumn, she makes her wine. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. She calls me by my name, more than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. The world is woven through us. I swear I won't forget how her fingers hold the thread.
Happy trails to us until we meet again. Happy trails to us, Jewish Women's Archive. Until then. Good night, everyone. Lila Tov, with much love forever and always.